A secret paper marked Atomic crossed a general's desk in December 1950. It proposed more than 30 nuclear bombs, not to end the world, but to redraw its borders. This was not the Cold War's distant nightmare. It was a battlefield plan against China. Why was this agenda buried? And what kind of power lets a celebrated hero nearly gamble the fate of millions? The answers begin with a single directive and a war spiraling out of control. December 9th, 1950. A cable left Tokyo, routed through military channels to the Pentagon. The signature at the bottom belonged to Douglas MacArthur. The language was measured, but the intent was unmistakable. MacArthur asked for the field commander's discretion to use atomic weapons in Korea. He did not request a single bomb or a narrow strike. He wanted the authority in his own hands to decide when the battlefield had reached the point of no return. The cable's timing reflected the chaos at the front. Chinese forces had poured across the Yalu River, overrunning United Nations positions, threatening to drive American troops into the sea. MacArthur argued that only the threat of atomic fire could prevent a total collapse. He described atomic weapons not as a tool for conquest, but as a last line of defense, a way to halt the enemy if all conventional options failed. The phrase "ultimate fallback" appeared in the text, a bureaucratic shield for an apocalyptic choice. No civilian oversight committee reviewed the request. No congressional debate followed. The decision, if granted, would rest on the judgment of a single general, thousands of miles from Washington. The cable did not spell out targets or numbers. It did not mention cities or fallout. It simply asked that the power to unleash the bomb be held in the field, reserved for the moment when defeat seemed certain. The message landed in a climate of panic. In Washington, officials read the words with growing unease. The precedent was unprecedented, the world's most destructive weapon placed on the edge of a collapsing front, with the trigger offered to one man. The cable opened a paper trail that would grow darker and more detailed in the weeks ahead. MacArthur's next move would not be a general request for authority, but a list, names, locations, and a tally of bombs he believed necessary to redraw the map with radioactive ink. Christmas Eve, 1950. In Tokyo, Far East Command staff worked late into the night, assembling a document that would never appear in public headlines. The request was precise. MacArthur's planners compiled a list of targets, bridges, rail yards, airfields, depots, stretching from the battered hills of North Korea deep into Manchuria. Each target was chosen not for symbolic value, but for its role in sustaining the Chinese offensive. Destroy the hubs, the logic ran, and the armies at the front would wither. The final tally was not a guess. It was a calculation: 34 atomic bombs. Not one or two, as in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but enough to redraw the map with radiation and fire. The list, dated December 24, 1950, broke the requirement down by function. Airfields to ground Chinese bombers. Rail nodes to choke the flow of reinforcements. Supply depots to starve the front. Bridges and tunnels along the Yalu River. The arteries of invasion would be reduced to radioactive rubble. Every bomb had a destination. The document did not name cities, but the geography was clear. Manchurian infrastructure, the backbone of Chinese logistics, was to be obliterated. The planners called them retardation targets, a phrase that masked the reality. These were choke points, selected to trap enemy forces and cut off any hope of relief. The number, 34, was not arbitrary. It matched the scale of the Chinese intervention and the sprawl of their supply lines. The goal was to create a barrier of devastation, a radioactive cordon that would sever the Korean battlefield from China itself. In the cold arithmetic of war, each bomb was a solution to a logistical problem, each target a node in a network to be erased. This was not a bluff or a theoretical exercise. The list was sent to Washington, stamped with the authority of MacArthur's command. It was a blueprint for atomic war, typed, catalogued, and ready to be executed if the order came. March 10, 1951. A new cable left MacArthur's headquarters, its language sharper, its intent unmistakable. This time the request was not just for permission or a list of targets. MacArthur demanded a D-Day atomic capability, a full-scale nuclear strike force ready and waiting in the Western Pacific. The proposal called for atomic bombs, bombers, and flight crews to be positioned so that on the chosen day, everything could be unleashed at once. There would be no delay, no scramble to assemble weapons after the order came. The arsenal would be in place, the targets already mapped. The logic behind the request was cold. Chinese and Soviet airfields in Manchuria had become the arteries feeding the war in Korea. Supply hubs, fuel depots, and staging grounds stretched from the Yalu River deep into Chinese territory. MacArthur's planners argued that only a coordinated atomic assault, striking dozens of air bases and supply lines in a single blow, could sever these lifelines. The December tally of 34 bombs was no longer a theoretical ceiling, it was becoming an operational baseline. Each bomb had a purpose: to carve a radioactive barrier across the neck of Manchuria, to make the land itself impassable, to halt any hope of Chinese reinforcement. The request did not come from a lone general acting on impulse. Far East Command staff, loyal to MacArthur, worked through the details. They calculated flight times, bomb yields, and fallout patterns. They synthesized the December target list with new intelligence on Soviet aircraft deployments, updating plans to account for growing risks. The concept of a radioactive cordon, a belt of devastation stretching from the Sea of Japan to the Yellow Sea, moved from theory to blueprint. Washington received the cable in silence. Behind closed doors, the Joint Chiefs weighed the implications: a nuclear arsenal, not just for battlefield emergencies, but for preemptive, theater-wide use. The stakes were no longer abstract. The machinery of atomic war was being assembled, piece by piece, by men who believed victory could be forged in radioactive fire. April 5, 1951. The Joint Chiefs of Staff drafted a directive behind closed doors, its language stripped of rhetoric, its intent unmistakable. If Chinese forces launched a major new offensive from Manchuria, or if bombers struck United Nations positions from bases beyond the Yalu, the order would activate. MacArthur could strike back across the border, deep into Chinese territory, but only under strict conditions. The power to release atomic weapons would remain in Washington's hands. The directive did not grant MacArthur free rein. Every step was hedged with control. The Strategic Air Command, SAC, would hold the keys. Bombers and their crews would answer to SAC headquarters, not to the general in Tokyo. Even as contingency plans took shape, civilian leaders and the Joint Chiefs kept the final trigger locked away. The plan called for readiness, not autonomy. Logistics moved in parallel with policy. In early April, SAC began shifting assets into position. B-29 bombers, already familiar with the long runways of Guam, now arrived with more than empty bomb bays. 9 Mark IV atomic bombs, each a descendant of the weapons dropped on Japan, were transferred to military custody, their fissile cores held under the strictest protocols. Assembly teams drilled procedures for rapid deployment. Weapons could be made combat-ready in hours, not days. The bombers remained on alert, their flight plans mapped to targets in North Korea and Manchuria. The chain of custody was precise. The Atomic Energy Commission retained legal authority over the cause until the president himself gave the word. No single general, no matter his rank or reputation, could bypass that final checkpoint. The process was designed to slow the hand that might reach for the bomb, even as the machinery of war demanded speed. On paper, the United States stood ready to answer escalation with atomic fire. In practice, every safeguard reflected deep mistrust of the enemy, of the moment, and of the man waiting in Tokyo. The bombers waited in the tropics, engines ticking over, their crews briefed but not unleashed. The order was clear. Prepare for nuclear war and keep the power to begin it far from the front. April 6, 1951. The Atomic Energy Commission gathered behind closed doors, the air in Washington thick with unease. Chairman Gordon Dean recorded the meeting in his notebook, every line measured, every word chosen for secrecy. The agenda was not theoretical. The Joint Chiefs had already shifted the balance. 9 Mark IV atomic bombs, their fissile cores still under Atomic Energy Commission lock, now sat within striking distance of the Korean Peninsula. The question was not whether the bombs could be delivered, but who would decide if they were used. Dean's notes captured a mood of deep anxiety. Commissioners reviewed the procedures for transferring nuclear cores to the Air Force. They insisted on a single, immovable rule: no core, no bomb without the President's direct order. The legal custody of the bomb remained with the Civilian Commission, but the machinery of war was moving faster than the paperwork. The fear was not just technical. Dean and his colleagues understood the real risk. Once weapons were forward deployed, the line between civilian oversight and military action could blur. MacArthur's record, his willingness to press for escalation, his impatience with political limits, haunted every discussion. Outside the Commission's walls, the world watched for signs. Diplomatic cables from London and New Delhi arrived at the State Department, each one echoing the same concern: rumors of American atomic deployments, questions about who controlled the trigger. British officials pressed for assurances: would the United States really unleash atomic fire without warning, or would allies be consulted first? In Beijing and Moscow, intelligence reports tracked the movement of US bombers, piecing together a picture from scattered clues. Chinese leaders wrote of American atomic blackmail in their correspondence with the Kremlin, weighing the possibility that the war in Korea could ignite something far larger. Inside the United States, the record was sanitized. The minutes from the April 6th meeting avoided explicit mention of targets or timelines. The language was clinical: stockpile numbers, transfer protocols, contingency planning. But beneath the surface, the commissioners wrestled with a constitutional dilemma. The president alone held the authority to cross the nuclear threshold. Yet the machinery, once set in motion, could slip from civilian hands to the field, especially with a commander as forceful as MacArthur waiting in Tokyo. The anxiety did not leak into public view. Official statements insisted the war in Korea was limited, the atomic arsenal a weapon of last resort. But in the shadows of Washington, civilian leaders weighed the cost of containment, not just in bombs but in the risk of losing control. Every decision, every sanitized minute was stamped, classified, and filed away, a record of a government straining to keep the nuclear leash tight, even as the world edged closer. Catastrophe. April 19th, 1951. The House chamber filled with applause as Douglas MacArthur took his place at the podium. He wore the uniform and the bearing of a man who saw himself as the last guardian of American honor. The speech he delivered to Congress that day would be remembered for a single line: "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." But beneath the carefully chosen words, another story ran silent. MacArthur's address was not a surrender. It was a declaration of martyrdom, a performance crafted for history. He spoke of being denied victory, of having his hands tied by men who did not understand the battlefield. He told Congress, "I know war as few men now living know it, and nothing to me is more revolting." Yet he insisted there was no substitute for victory. The public saw a general forced into exile, a hero punished for speaking hard truths. But the record behind the speech tells a different tale. In the months before his dismissal, MacArthur had pressed for the authority to unleash atomic fire, not as a last resort, but as a decisive stroke. His cables to Washington, stamped secret, outlined plans to redraw Asia's map with radioactive ink. The man who stood before Congress as a victim had, in private, demanded the power to escalate beyond all precedent. The contradiction was stark. In the chamber, MacArthur wrapped himself in the language of duty and sacrifice. He spoke of fading away, of leaving the stage with dignity. But in the archives, his signature appeared beneath requests for atomic discretion, for the right to decide when the world would cross the nuclear threshold. He cultivated the image of the tragic commander, undone by politics. Yet the evidence shows a general who believed his own judgment could not be questioned, not by presidents or by law. The speech was a mask, a final act in a public theater that hid the reality of private ambition and a willingness to gamble with annihilation for the sake of victory. Douglas MacArthur's atomic ambitions included a claim that still echoes in military folklore, the idea of a radioactive cobalt barrier that would seal the Korean frontier for generations. In later interviews, MacArthur described a plan to spread Cobalt-60 from the Sea of Japan to the Yellow Sea, insisting that such a belt would remain lethal for 60 to 120 years. He spoke of wagons, trucks, and planes dispersing radioactive material in the wake of atomic detonations, a wall of poison to halt any land invasion from the north. The science, even in 1950, told a different story. Cobalt-60, the isotope at the center of MacArthur's vision, has a half-life of just over 5 years. That means its radioactivity drops by half every 5 years. By 60 years, its potency would be a tiny fraction of what it started. Physicists at the Atomic Energy Commission understood this decay curve. They knew that to keep a belt of land uninhabitable for a century would require not just a handful of bombs, but a massive industrial effort to produce and disperse radioactive cobalt in quantities far beyond anything the United States could generate. The logistics alone were daunting. Even if the material could be produced, the dangers of transporting and spreading it without poisoning friendly forces were nearly insurmountable. Nuclear policy experts of the era dismissed the cobalt barrier as a fantasy. The mathematics of fallout were unforgiving. Weather would scatter radioactive particles unevenly, creating hotspots and gaps rather than a neat, impassable line. Rain could wash contamination into rivers, spreading danger far beyond the intended zone. The idea of a stable, predictable radioactive cordon was a mirage, one that ignored both the physics of decay and the chaos of the natural world. Behind closed doors, scientists and senior officials quietly rebuffed MacArthur's rhetoric. The cobalt bomb remained a theoretical terror, discussed in academic circles as a warning, not a weapon. No barrier could hold back armies for 100 years. The true barrier was political, not physical, a line drawn not by radiation, but by the limits of reason and restraint. Today, the world's most consequential decisions still unfold behind closed doors, sometimes with nuclear weapons on the table. Civilian oversight remains the only real barrier between ambition and annihilation. As new conflicts test old limits, the lesson is clear. Unchecked power, even dressed in uniform, is always a threat to us all. History's shadows are never as distant as we hope. What would you want revealed next? Let us know below.